Hello, I am Simon Wittig, Associate Curator for the Arts of the Islamic World at the Freer Gallery of Art and Arthur M. Sackler Gallery, the Smithsonian's National Museum of Asian Art. I am delighted to welcome you today to our lunchtime series, Sneak Peek, New Research from the Freer and Sackler. Each month, staff members present in-depth personal perspectives and discuss ongoing research connected to works in the Freer and Sackler collections. It is an insider's view at original, unpublished, and developing ideas from our curators, conservators, and scientists. Lectures will be followed by a Q&A, taking live questions from the audience. In today's program, the Topography of Emotion, 18th-century landscape paintings of Udaipur, Rajasthan, Debra Diamond, curator of South and Southeast Asian art, will present research in progress on 18th-century paintings that represent the topography around Udaipur, a Hindu court in northwest India. Until quite recently, it was thought that the British brought the landscape genre to India, and that pre-colonial states were not interventionists in environmental terms. Dr. Diamond discusses paintings previously classified as portraits. Through a significant but little-known painting in the Freer collection, she decenters the king to focus on cultural and ecological contexts. The talk is a sneak peek at research that Debra Diamond is doing, along with co-curator Dipti Khera, professor of art history at NYU, for the museum's 2022-23 exhibition, A Splendid Land, painting from Royal Udaipur. I'm now delighted to introduce our speaker, a specialist in Indian painting and the visual culture of yoga. Debra Diamond received her PhD in South Asian art history from Columbia University. Since joining the museum in 2000, she has received numerous awards for her research and for the exhibitions Encountering the Buddha, Art and Practice Across Asia, Yoga, the Art of Transformation, and Garden and Cosmos, Royal Art of Jodhpur. Debra, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Simon, for serving as moderator today and for the kind introduction. And I'm very, very grateful also to my wonderful colleagues at the museum, Sana Mirza, Lizzie Stein, Masme Farhad, and Andy Finch for arranging today's talk. And also thank you and welcome everybody who came today at lunchtime or whatever time it is in your zone. It's really great and a little bit nerve-wracking to present research that is still in progress. Anyway, let me begin by sharing my screen. Over millennia, India's authors and poets described sacred rivers and mountains, they praised cities and places, and they lingered on the moods and emotions these places evoked. In contrast, over the same vast expanse of time, painters rarely depicted places. So it may surprise that between 1700 and 1900, court artists in Udaipur, capital of the Kingdom of Mewar in today's Rajasthan, produced hundreds of paintings that represent the kingdom's scrub-covered hillsides, riverine plains, tilled fields, and stone quarries. To date, these works have been interpreted as royal portraits. In this peek at a completely unstudied painting in the Freer Gallery of Art, I explore how Udaipur artists evoke the memories and emotions of being in a particular place at a particular time with particular companions. The conventional title of the painting I'm discussing, Maharana Sangram Singh II Hunting, misleads, I think, in its singular focus on the king, not least because its composition centers on that dark lake, ringed by fertile flatlands and scrubby mountains that splay softly outward. Decentering the king allows us to consider the lake as the painting's semantic as well as its compositional fulcrum. It is in fact an artificial lake at dawn. Its water is dark gray and glossy to reflect what is still a night sky. The vantage point and color are conventions. Other contemporaneous landscapes also depict from above, water bodies that are dark gray colored when it's dawn or dusk. This close-up in raking light shows how heavily the artist burnished the lake to get it that flat and reflective. This chunky pink oblong is the dam that created the lake, and below it is the village of Diwali. And the tank, the artificial lake, feeds a channel, like sort of a river-like channel that supplies wells and irrigates fields. In the upper third of the painting is the royal hunt. The king, Maharana Sangram Singh II, on a black steed, and a falconer wearing yellow pants and green boots, both appear multiple times in order to convey the sequential stages of felling a grain. So Diwali is 2 miles north of the city palace, where the painting's patron, Sangram Singh II, reigned from 1710 to 1734. His dynasty, the Sisodias of Mewar, had shifted their capital to Udaipur in 1559, realizing that its mountains provided protection from invaders, as well as the means for water resource engineering. Like much of Western India, Mewar depends on a fickle annual monsoon. Therefore, water management is key, or was key, to the kingdom's agricultural abundance and prosperity. Consequently, the 16th and 17th centuries were times of massive building programs and ecological interventions. The largest of these are the city palace and a system of these massive interconnected man-made lakes, of which 2, Lake Pichola and Fateh Sagar, are visible in this photograph. And that the arrow, well, the Freer painting records a landscape that no longer exists. And Diwali, which is roughly there where the arrow ends, is today an urban suburb of Udaipur. Its tank was re-engineered and then completely enlarged into what is today Fateh Sagar in the year 1888. Court painters first began representing Udaipur's houses, streets, and landscapes in the early 18th century. Dipti Khera's work, recently published in The Place of Many Moods, Udaipur's Painted Lands and India's 18th Century, incisively explores this pictorial turn and its invocation of moods, feeling, and emotions, for which the Hindi term is pav. And Khera has explored the pav of palaces, monsoons, urban lakes in the city in her groundbreaking work. So in today's talk, I'm extending her inquiry to representations of the terrain outside the capital. I use the term landscape for a corpus of paintings that shares these characteristics. One, their medium is opaque watercolor, mostly made from ground minerals, including gold, as well as some organic ingredients, and the support is paper. This is the same medium of Persian, Mughal, and Rajput manuscript paintings, but instead of being like handheld size, these are really quite large, with average dimensions of about 2 feet by 3 feet. Next, the terrain always includes water, sometimes in the form of a river, but more often in man-made lakes, dams, sluices, irrigation channels, or wells. This acknowledges that the economic health and social stability of the semi-arid kingdom really depended greatly on water harvesting. The topography usually also includes mountains. And some landscapes, like the tiger hunt in the upper left corner here, have absolutely no sky or no horizon line whatsoever, and those are literally landscapes. Also, the king is really quite small in relationship to the environment, and he is often, but not always, hunted. Art historians consistently interpret the large hunt scenes as royal portraits that demonstrate martial prowess and legitimate kingship. This interpretation may more neatly suit small paintings of rulers slaying prey, such as an 18th century painting of the Udaipur Maharana Ari Singh, thrusting his emphasis on local geography and environmental interventions in the larger paintings call for shifting background to. When I began this project, art historians knew from inscriptions the names of some of the locations represented. What I set out to discover was why artists made certain pictorial choices and if and when they mimetically represented like actual landscape features. This was really a new area, so I'd like to gratefully acknowledge the generous scholarship of Janak Saab, Hansmukh Seth, Priyanka Seth at the City Palace Museum, Udaipur, of course, Dipti Khera and Julie Hughes, and geographers in Rajasthan and Washington, D.C., who are too numerous to name today, and for research support, the Smithsonian Institution and the Maharana of Mewar Charitable Foundation, I'm sorry. So Rajasthani inscriptions on painting versos can tell us date, location, time of year, names of participants, names of artists, and the painting subject. For example, this painting, 18th century, Udaipur, around the same time as the Freer painting, depicts a hunt ground named Nard Magra. On the verso, a scribe identified the painting subject as the mood or emotion of Nard Magra. And that same reference to emotion as the subject of the landscape of these paintings recurs on a number of works from this period. So I wanted to know, how did its artist evoke the emotion of Nard Magra and thus shape a memory of that hunt? So one of his key strategies lies in the juxtaposition of vantage points. We can see that he represented the contours of the hills in elevation view, that is, as the hunters would have seen them on entering the grounds. And they're actually entering from the direction of Udaipur. In contrast, he represented the actual hunting fields from above. And that has the effect of expanding the areas that the small, hunters, seem to traverse across the painting. And you can see from this drone's eye view, that compares the course of the river and the location of a palace, that the artist, has worked from a vantage point looking down that records an actual landscape. Also, when we look close, you can see that the artist dipped a paint-dipped crumpled cloth, like all across the surface, to create these sort of prickly acacias that those hills are covered with. So his two perspectives, his vantage points, and his frottage technique emphasize the knowledge of a place that comes from lived and embodied experience. It's what the anthropologist Tim Ingold has called a dwelling perspective. And here, that perspective is the experience of riding across a stony, thorny expanse of Nard Magra in pursuit of wild boar. Zooming in, we can see that the king's spear breaks when it hits the boar, and then the wild, really dangerous boar goes rampaging, and a bunch of other courtiers come and they try and kill the boar. And then finally, one courtier saves the day by killing the boar. So what then are the memories that the painter and scribe are recording for posterity? A courtier's triumph? A thorny expanse? Here's where connecting the experience of places across genres became so useful. Remarkably, Dipti Khera located and has begun translating a hunt chronicle named the Eighteenth-Century, composed in 1747 by the poet Nand Ram for Maharana Jagat Singh. The poem praises the king's beauty and bravery. Less expectedly, the poet repeatedly praises the collective, calling the hunting party the bravest of the brave and describing how they work together to find and kill game. Pleasure is the other constant refrain. The men have fun together. They delight in wringing the necks of birds together. They get excited by tracking tigers together. They enjoy partying at night. Their horses are magnificent. They're besotted by the beauty of trees, flowers, and creepers. So the poet's emphasis on fraternity, on collective bonding, on respect for various hunters' skills, and on a certain magnificence of landscape is what we find in these large landscape paintings. The large hunt scenes first became popular in the 1720s, which we can partially attribute to Sangram Singh's passion for hunting. The new genre also accords with cultural shifts that took place across North India as Mughal hegemony waned. Particularly after the death of the Emperor Aurangzeb in 1707, it became important to strengthen local bonds of loyalty, to keep newly autonomous states from splintering apart. And kingdoms, across North India begin patronizing art forms that reimagine local environments and strengthen interpersonal relationships. It's in that climate that Udaipur painters begin recording the ruling elite as they collectively hunt, enjoy each other's company, and delight in significant landscapes. Because depicting the mood of local landscapes was really a new form of picture making in Udaipur in the 1720s, it's a time of experimentation. Artists are drawing mainly from three different visual traditions. One, the idealized imagery, jewel-like colors, and two-dimensional compositions of 17th century Udaipur painting, such as this Ramayana folio circa 1685. Two, from the depth, shading, and local colors of imperial Mughal painting, such as the 17th century hunt scene in the Sackler. And three, North Indian cartographic traditions that combine plan and elevation views in large important places and orient mountains so that they face towards the implied or implicit viewer. So we'll flesh out those genealogies in our larger project, but here I focus on why the Diwali painter framed the hunt with these particular elements. My inquiry was inspired by a question of Thoreau's. When considering his home at Walden Pond, Thoreau asked, and I quote, "Why do precisely these objects which we behold make a world?" So first, the Aravalis, the mountains that the Sisodias valued and with which they self-identified. They settled in Udaipur because the range provided protection. They valued the memory of brave ancestors who repelled invaders on their slopes. And they identified their dynastic character, like their toughness, with the rocky crags crossed with ravines and covered with this prickly growth. And they not only knew the hills as soldiers and as hunters, but also as a ruling elite that built its wealth on knowledge of the elevations and watersheds that captured monsoon rains and raised water tables. Thus, the painting's tallest mountains are significant because higher elevations get more rain. So in a good monsoon year, water falls onto the tall hills in the painting's background and runs downward before being captured by the dam. Consistent with that, the river below the dam, which comes out of a sluice hidden from our view by trees, backs up behind a second dam. It's small, but you can see it there, a horizontal line. So the water moves slowly in that first area, and that's why lotuses are growing there. And then below the smaller dam, which was probably built to raise the water level to irrigate the fields at right, the river's swifter, and the artists gave it ripples and eddies to show that sort of movement and awareness of water. To convey the slope of the land, I think that the painter quite cleverly used these diminishing shapes and forms. The lake is huge, the blocky dam smaller, and then the village forms are minutely detailed. And this gives the impression that the water behind the big dam is higher than the village. And then it sort of flows downward and then into that narrow river below. So to constitute the village as a compelling place, the artist drew on well-established motifs. There are numerous wells, there's an impressive walled garden, a nobleman's estate with an elephant, Hindu and Muslim inhabitants, and 3 gleaming temples. Looking closely, you have to look quite closely, we can discern how the painter reiterated a social order through embodied hierarchies. The laborers are smaller and darker than their managers, who are smaller than the king's grooms, and so on, up and up and up to the body of the king. There they are. The managed landscape also includes that grid of grassy green on which the royal party is hunting. It's a bir in Rajasthani, a specially maintained habitat for migrating waterfowl, which both protected the birds and also supported the social order. The bir and its birds were restricted solely to the king's use. So last but not least is the hunt. For it's here that the artist embeds a different kind of storytelling onto the terrain. The image and inscription together convey that the king entered the flatlands with 29 noblemen. He left 17 on the tank's south side on the painting's left, and then he honored 12 of them by selecting them to join him on the hunt. Then on the beard, time sort of speeds up, it gets exciting. The king is shown 4 times in rapid succession as he gallops forward and whacks the crane with a club. And then the falconer, Pancholi Devchand, is actually shown 7 times, more than the king. And as the inscription records for posterity, Pancholi Devchand had the falcon on his hand. He released it, the crane was caught. Excuse me. So, for the painting's primary viewers, who were the king and his courtiers, the image depicts the dawn hunt as a collective activity with valued companions. The contours of the mountains record their memory of entering the area. And they're all handsome, virile, beautifully dressed, astride magnificent horses, in a glorious place, on a lovely morning, surrounded by beloved mountains, on a flourishing bir, enjoying killing birds, and near a prosperous village. The full reservoir, the artificial lake at center stage, sums up the prosperous, perfectly maintained kingdom. The mood, the bhav, the topography of emotion is that of remarkable men enjoying a remarkable landscape in a remarkable realm. So today's sneak peek was just a little part of this much larger project. My co-curator, Dipti Khera, my colleagues at the National Museum of Asian Art, our partners at the City Palace Museum Udaipur, and I are preparing an international loan exhibition, A Splendid Land, paintings from Royal Udaipur, which will open here in Washington, DC on November 22nd, and it will inaugurate the museum's centennial year celebrations. The exhibition is innovative. It's focused around the bhav or mood of place, and each gallery is devoted to a single location and a single emotion. So visiting the exhibition will be an experiential, perhaps emotional journey from the lake palaces and lakes at the center of Udaipur, through the city palace and the city, outwards towards the terrain and the topography like Diwali, and then all the way on to the heavens and cosmos, which turn out to look a lot like Udaipur. The multi-sensory quality of the paintings will be brought to life by the great art filmmaker Amit Datta, who is creating a soundscape especially for the exhibition. We hope to welcome you here in Washington, DC in 2022. And today I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Debra, for your thought-provoking presentations and very exciting presentation of the exhibition. I very much look forward to seeing the exhibition next year. Talking about the exhibition, what percentage of the paintings in the Udaipur, in the exhibition, are landscapes? Is the one you developed, is it one typical also?
The one that I showed is not typical. It's only maybe about 9% of the total exhibition, the terrain and the landscapes, although it's quite important in sort of the psyche. And important too, because these have been the most ignored of all of Udaipur paintings. We are really fortunate in that we have this great lender of the City Palace Museum Udaipur, as well as some private lenders. So we'll be bringing together a lot of paintings that have never been shown to the public before.
So we're receiving questions. Why did the format, so basically from small handheld paintings to large-scale painting, change so suddenly and dramatically at this time?
That's actually something that we're writing. Dipti Khera has written about, and we're working on the catalog right now in the exhibition, and that's what we want to sort of explore. But one of the biggest differences is that there becomes this great interest in celebrating the sort of multi-sensory sort of experience of being in this amazing place and these beautiful palaces and these moist lakes. And the paintings get larger, and larger to sort of create this sort of enveloping, or recreate this enveloping quality of place and the emotion.
Now about water. Have you come across paintings from this period of Mewars, reservoirs outside of Udaipur, like Rajasthan, Jaisamand, etc.?
Yes. For example, in the exhibition, we have a painting of a diplomatic meeting that's taking place on the shores of Jaisamand. And not sure if but there are. And the thing is that you don't always see right away the water in the Udaipur paintings. Like, it's often where at least Western viewers are accustomed to seeing sky, and it's blue, so it looks like sky, but it's often water. And that's where we see these lakes serving as backdrops for diplomatic meetings or hunts.
Which bring to the questions like, why did the rulers of Mewar seem to have been so invested in water harvesting? Is that something well known? I mean, is it?
I think it's one of these things that's really quite well known and celebrated in Mewar, or even today. But it's only been in like the last 15 years that scholars have sort of accepted the fact that pre-colonial Indian states, Indian kingdoms were like very, sort of interventionist in terms of the land, and that they did an incredible amount of water harvesting and water management, which is one of the reasons I got really interested in the landscape, because this is a time of crisis, all over the world in terms of water resources. So thinking about cultural attitudes towards water becomes a very big part of the exhibition. And based on Dipti's work, one of our journeys, one of our rooms is actually devoted to the mood of the emotion. Because water is so precious in Western India, the emotion of the monsoon is one of like great joy and romantic feelings, which is quite different than the way that people on the East Coast typically think of rainstorms. So bringing that out, that sort of joy and celebration and delight in water in like all of its facets, is a big part of the exhibition.
Related to that, was this tradition of landscape painting adopted by other Rajasthani courts?
Yes, in different ways. I mean, we see some landscape paintings coming from Kota and Bundi, like here and there. We see this, and it's usually in the case of hunt scenes, where we see these landscapes. I feel like they've been ignored. I mean, Vishaka Desai, in the 90s, did an incredible article about these large Udaipur paintings, understanding them as contextual portraits. And she began to like shift the focus to the background, but they still remained a lot about the king. And so I'm just trying to, work with sort of the emotion of the entire place. I think I answered that question.
You did. And there was another question that seems very interesting, like how do these paintings differ from maps produced for the Rajasthan kings during these times?
There's a lot of similarities with mapping conventions in many of the paintings. And that's probably because painters were also map makers. And so one of the ways that we figured out how to read these landscapes was by trying to understand those mapping conventions, including the fact that Rajasthani maps were made to be viewed from all different directions. So it's not just hanging it on the wall, but these the paintings and the maps were probably put on the floor or on small tables, and people looked at them from every direction.
Oh, so that leads up to the question: But yeah, because they're large in scales, where they're like held up for viewers, hung up on walls, so apparently put on tables. Those landscape paintings.
They could have been held up sometimes, and they were sometimes put on the floor or on a carpet or on a low table. Today they're framed and in the fabulous City Palace Museum or in museums around the world.
Okay, I'm going through the questions. There is a lot of questions. I'm not sure we'll have the time to answer all of them. Can you comment on what else we might learn about paintings of Udaipur in that time, and if we were able to include wall paintings? Or are the two mediums different in how they represent landscapes, the wall paintings and those paintings on paper? Does the difference in scale matter also?
I think that actually, I think all the questions are good, but I think that's a really thought-provoking question. But I haven't done a thorough enough study of existing wall paintings to be sure. However, there is this amazing room within the City Palace Museum in which an entire room is sort of covered with sort of copies of paintings, so that the wall paintings and the paper paintings sort of merge into one total experience. And that was the place where one of the Maharanas enjoyed his pleasures. And you have to just read that between the lines.
Yeah. So more about the painting. Are such deployments of moods by painters evident when the royal patron isn't present or in non-royal contexts?
Okay, I think first of all that this whole notion of sort of creating like mood and emotion and creating an emotion within the viewer is a very sort of ancient Indian aesthetic practice. Right? It comes out of Rasa theory, so we know about it from at least the second century forward. And certainly in 17th century Udaipur, before the landscapes, the artists are mainly depicting, sacred epics, the Ramayana, or courtly poems, the Rasa Priya, and those are very much about mood. And the king is rarely present in those, if at all. So one thing, mood is important in sort of non-historical paintings. And then we also have the appearance of other patrons, like other noblemen who are patronizing these paintings, and they appear in those works. And then finally, I think mood would be important. Yeah, mood is really present in paintings when there are just women. So definitely it's not only the king, and there are examples without noblemen.
And I think that was our last question, because we reached the end of that wonderful talk. Thank you, Debra. I'm sure like the audience will agree with me that we all look forward to the exhibition. There will be an accompanying catalog, right, of the exhibition.
Yes.
So let's stay tuned until like November 22nd, right? It's 22. Well, thank you very much, Debra. Thank you all for joining us today. You can find more information on this and other events on our website, asia.si.edu/events. Additional questions and comments can be directed to our scholarly programs and publication department by emailing asiascholarlyprogram@si.edu. Thank you very much and for attending. Thank you very much, Debra, again for your talk, and stay safe. Goodbye.